Awesome. So, this is just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about our personal experiences with working and interning, and then we're going to talk about cover letters and resumes, a little bit about how to go through the interview process, and just general resources to help you guys out. So, the overview, Aarushi.
So hi everyone, I'm Aarushi. I'm a sophomore, and I'm at UCLA, and I'm majoring in stats and biz econ. And in high school, I worked 3 jobs. So in my senior year, I worked as a music theory instructor at my piano studio, and I was also a journalism intern and a Bank of America student leader through their high school internship program. And then in my first year of college, I interned at 2 growth stage startups that were in the financial service and education sectors. Right now, I'm currently interning at a real estate startup based in New York. And this summer, I will be a summer intensive program scholar at Girls Who Invest, and that's going to be in Southern California.
All right, and so as you guys know, I'm Brooke. I'm currently a junior at Northwood High School. I have worked as a server slash like a hostess at the Tomikawa Sushi restaurant, and I've also been a swimming coach for the Stonegate Seahawks over summer. And I'm currently working with Smart Reach Foundation and Irvine Lights, and I used to work with Interverse Education, so I have a lot of experience with just a lot of administrative stuff and definitely a lot of applications. And I'm also currently a very active member of Civil Air Patrol, which has given me a lot of opportunities to work in to staff different events and just build my character as a leader. And so very excited to be here today. And with that said, we're going to get started on the resume and cover letter lesson of our little webinar. If you guys ever have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat. If the questions are super relevant to what we're talking about right now, then Aarushi and I will just answer them right away. And otherwise, we'll answer them at the end in our question and answer section. All right, so the first section, as you can see, we're going to be talking about cover letters and resumes. These are super essential to whenever you're applying for a job or an internship. And so we're going to start with talking about what a resume is. So a resume, I'm sure you guys know, is just this document that lists your strengths, abilities, work experiences, and qualifications to your employer or recruiter. And since it's going to be the first thing you turn into them, they're going to get this before your interview, before like a phone call with them or anything. This is going to be a first impression. So it's really important that you make a really professional statement and that you show that you can be a dedicated asset to this team and that you're aware of yourself and your personal growth. So just in summary, the resume is a summary of you, and so it should not be generic and it should apply to just you as a person. So I came up with 5 different steps that I use to write my resumes. And the first step is analyzing your purpose in the audience. And so in this first step, you're going to have to brainstorm ways to get noticed to help you get hired. And the way you do that is you're going to put yourself in the shoes of your employer, of whatever job or intern you're applying for. And you're going to think about, if I was an employer, what would I want in an applicant, right? So I'd say I was applying to work at a restaurant. And so when I wrote my application, I was like, well, if I'm working at a restaurant, I'd probably need, if I was hiring for a restaurant, I'd probably want someone that learns quickly, can multitask, and can work well with customers. And so you should be brainstorming these questions and you're going to address them in your resume. And so that leads us to our second step, which is conducting research. And this is pretty much just expanding on our first step, where we're going to research exactly what your job needs and what you want. So you're going to look through the job description and maybe just like research more about that certain career or that job. And you're going to see what you need, what that job needs, and like certain qualifications, and just personality traits that you think would apply to that job. And then you would then just like make a list of your past experiences, your personality traits, your accomplishments that you think fulfill all of these points. And after you have all of that put together in just one master list, you're going to start just writing your resume. And so here I have a list of what you need to include. You're going to have your personal contact information, your objective, relevant experiences, education/training, accomplishments, and awards. So there's a lot of different things that you can include in your resume. So here we see we have work experience. So 2 to 3 things that include client-facing skills and quantify details. So that means in your resume, you should be able to say specifically exactly what you did and how many, and this will just make your whole argument of why you should be in the job a lot stronger. And then leadership experiences, so clubs you're in at school or organizations that you're in, nonprofits. And a lot of times, it depends on the job, but most employers are looking for people with leadership initiatives. And so if you can show that you're in positions of leaderships, that will make you a lot more appealing to most employers. And then your skills, you can, if you speak multiple languages, you can put that on. If the job is something technical and requires working with computers, maybe you can say like the type of codes that the coding languages you know, certain softwares that you have experience with. So basically very technical things that relate to whatever job you're applying for. And then interests, you can just, it's a little spot for you to just include more about your character. And so just some extracurriculars you're in, some things you're just interested in, and that will help your employer get a bit better picture of just who you are as a person. All right, and so here I have attached the resume that I actually used to get my job at Tomikawa. And as you can see, in the very top, we have your personal information. I always include just the city I'm at, my cell phone, and my personal email. And so this should just be a very easy way for your employer to reach out to you and contact you. So it doesn't have to be super personal. Like you don't have to put your exact address. You don't have to like say like who your mother is or something. It's just super general how to contact you. And yeah. All right, and see, I have my name like big and bolded. I just think it looks nice. This is not the only format you have to do, but just having your name stand out is a really big part, because when your employer's flipping through these resumes, oftentimes they have a really big stack and they need to immediately be able to see who this resume belongs to. So right under that, I put a little section called objective. And this is kind of like the only place you're going to talk about what you want in the job. So the objective can also be a little bit of a personal statement, and it tells the employer what job you want and what skills you're hoping to develop from that job. So here I said I wanted to gain experience in the workforce and develop practical skills. And right below that, this is the meat of your resume. It's your relevant experiences with bullet statements. And so here I have all my experiences. I have athletics, I have Silver Air Patrol, my previous job as a swimming coach, just some leadership experiences I have below that. And you can see in each section, I include the year that I participated in and where it was at, and it's all in chronological order. And under each section, we have these little bullet points. So these bullet points should just give the employer a little information on what exactly that job was. And also, more importantly, these statements tell the employer what you learned from those jobs and how it shaped you to become a better candidate for whatever you're applying for. So for example, here I wrote Winter Raptor 4 Echo Flight Sergeant. Well, to someone that's not in Civil Air Patrol, that doesn't mean a lot, right? They don't really know what that is. And so below that, I talked about how I got servant leadership skills and team building skills. I learned to be self-disciplined and have attention to detail, and I learned to remain calm and problem solve under pressure. And so if you're, even though this has nothing to do with serving in a restaurant, like being in Civil Air Patrol does not have anything to do with serving in a restaurant, but I showed how the skills that I learned from Civil Air Patrol might be useful in a restaurant. And so a big problem when I had applying for my first job, like a big thing I was worried about, I was like, well, I've never worked in a restaurant before. Like, I can't make sushi. I barely know how to use a stove, right? But so how am I gonna like write anything on my resume? Like, I don't have any experience with working with food. Well, that's okay. And this is also going to happen not only when you apply to your first job, but if you ever decide to switch careers. What you do is you brainstorm the traits and the skills you think will be important for that job, and you're going to show how you're able to get those traits and skills from your past experiences. And a lot of the times when you're applying for these smaller jobs as a high schooler, the jobs aren't going to require a lot of like technical qualifications. They're not really looking for someone that necessarily has like gone to culinary school or has like a master's in, I don't know, cooking or something. They're going to be looking for people that are easy to teach and they're eager to work. And so just showing your personality and your traits that your person, yeah, so sorry, words. So like your personality traits will be enough most of the time to get you that job. And below that, we have your education. You don't have to put a lot about it. I just put where I'm studying, what grade I'm in, and my current GPA, just to, again, have the employer know a little more about me and what kind of person I am through my academics. And right below that, I have my achievements. And so you don't have to list, or you don't want to list every single award you've gotten ever in your life. But I listed the things that I thought would be important to an employer. So I received Coach's Award in high school athletics for work ethic, and I thought it would be really important to show that I have a good work ethic. And so that was a relevant award that I put on. And I got another award for leadership. And again, I thought an employer would want to know that I'm a good leader, and this achievement is a great way for me to show that. And so I put that there. And then right below that, I just put a list of, I guess, adjectives I would use to describe myself, my skills and traits. And so these are things that I thought would be important to be a server or hostess. And so I just added them, and I think they helped me fine. Okay, so once you've drafted your resume, we're gonna have 2 more steps left before you get to your final resume. After you have everything written down, obviously you're gonna wanna edit your resume. So right now you're looking for typos, grammatical errors, making sure that the format is consistent throughout the entire thing, and making sure that what you say is accurate and it accurately portrays yourself, and you have an accurate understanding of what the job actually wants. And then we also want to make sure our language is concise and it's plain. So a lot of the times I'm kind of guilty of this too. Like when I'm writing essays or writing something for school, I like to use really, really big words to sound smarter. Totally see the appeal in that, but in your resume, you don't have to use these big fancy words. Just use easy to understand language. This should be something that like a 5th grader could understand, because you just want to make it really easy and very clear to your employer. And also using key phrases. So notice that in the bullet statements, they weren't long, flowy sentences. They're just short bullets, again, because we're keeping it brief and we're keeping it concise. And after that, this step is totally optional, but I honestly think it helps me a lot, is I like to send my resume, if I have a chance, to a friend, and they'll help me check for errors that I missed, making sure that they think, like in other people's eyes, it looks professional, that has a nice visual appeal and format. And you should ask your friend or whoever's editing your resume, like, do you think the main points of my resume are easily found? Is all the important stuff like straight out in front of your face, and it's not hidden in fluff? Okay, and just based on things that I've learned in the past about applying for things, here's some helpful tips for writing a resume. So again, keep it brief and concise. Second, have a visual appeal. And to do that, use a lot of open white space. So as you saw in my resume earlier, it was very like, in some places it's compact, but most of it, there's just a lot of empty space. And it just looks neater and it's more appealing to the reader. And again, I mentioned this before, but a lot of times when you're applying for a highly sought after job or an internship, people are flipping through a giant stack of resumes. And if you have a resume that looks beautiful, clean cut, and just, like simple, it's going to jump out at them and it's going to make them want to read it. So it's also like another first impression thing. So having a nice, pretty resume, first impression, someone will want to pick it up over another resume that's just filled with words and it just looks cramped and hard to read. And then in the bullet statements, we use something called power verbs. So when you're describing the skills and traits that you've gotten from your past experiences, you want to use these power verbs so they can be like utilized, acquired, exceeded goals, developed. And these are really great words that reflect achievement and success. So again, this resume you're going to be using it to sell yourself. So you always want to paint yourself in a positive light and show growth through every experience. So using these words will help you show that you've grown as a person through your previous jobs, and that growth will help you in the job that you're applying for. And then some things to avoid: super personal data. So again, like I don't need to, a lot of times, like you don't, unless it's required, you don't need to put your birthday, you don't need to put where you grew up as a child. So just, again, the data that we have is super, the data that we put on top of resume is just simply, how is my employer going to contact me if they want to call me back for an interview? Then we don't want pictures and photographs. It's unnecessary and it takes up space. And the third one is kind of debatable, but a lot of times I don't put months or days in my resumes. But I've seen people do months before, and that's fine. But days, you don't need to be that specific. So you could just write like June 2019 to February 2020. So again, keeping it just brief. And then irrelevant information, just anything that doesn't really help your case and it's not, you can't tie it directly to you getting that job, then you don't need to put it in there. And the last thing, I have a problem doing this, and it's called resume stacking. And based on the name, I guess you guys can probably infer what that means. That's just like vomiting words onto your resume, vomiting experiences onto your resume. You don't want to do that. When you make your list of what you want to include on your resume, again, you need to make sure that it directly applies to what you're applying for. And you're not just like putting things on to have a longer list. Because a lot of times employers can see through that and it just makes the whole thing annoying to read, and it's just not a great situation. Also, there's sometimes this question when you're like, okay, I'm applying for this job and I just got accepted into this other position, but I haven't served it yet. So should I still put that position because technically I'm going to serve it, right? Well, first of all, don't do that, because if you put that on your resume, you're not going to be able to show any growth from that experience. And again, your resume should show your growth. So even though you're going to have that experience, there's nothing meaningful you can write from it because you haven't taken anything meaningful out of it yet. So that will also just be, so if you just put that on and you have a lot of empty words trying to describe it, that's just going to be like stacking your resume, and it's going to be very unappealing to the employer. Okay, cover letters. A cover letter is basically this little letter that you write to the employer that you're going to attach on the top of your resume. It's not always required. A lot of times optional, but I personally really like writing them. and a quote from the Air Force Tongue and Quill, which is this document that the U.S. Air Force wrote to help their members with just communication. And it says that the cover letter speaks for you to garner the interest of the employer. So write the cover letter so that the employer will want to read your resume and offer you an interview. This is just a great way to summarize what a cover letter is. And so here I actually have my cover letter that I wrote for Tomikawa. And again, you're just gonna have your personal contact information, similar to your resume, easy, how am I gonna contact you if I want you for the job? And then here, right under that, you put who you're addressing to in the salutation. So this is like the Dear Hiring Manager part and usually the first paragraph. So you're gonna wanna address it to just one person. If you don't know exactly who that person is, you can just say to whom it might concern or Dear Hiring Manager, something simple like that. It doesn't have to be a specific name. And then in the first paragraph, you're gonna wanna introduce yourself and say what you're applying for. And then sometimes you can include where you saw the job listing on. So I just said, I was thrilled to see your opening on Indeed because that's where I found the job listing. And then you just write, this is just pretty much your hook and you're gonna try to grab the attention of your employer. And then below that you have your body paragraphs, and here you're just gonna be writing how you think you'll be useful to the organizations and how you think your experiences are gonna help you with that. And very important in this section, since this is the majority of your cover letter, you want to use very exciting, positive tone and show that you're just really excited to apply for this job and you're really excited to work for them, because that's just going to make it more fun to read and more captivating, and your employer will most likely want to read your resume after that. And then here in your last paragraph, I have this little mini paragraph, and it's your call to action. So when you end your cover letter, you want to end with confidence. So even though you don't know if you're going to get an interview or not, you don't know if you're going to get a call back, it's always great to say, like, I can't wait to meet with you. I can't wait to hear back from you. And I always like to say something about, like, if you give me a chance to work here, I'll be sure to, you can see right here, I'll be sure to bring my dedication, enthusiasm, knowledge, and excellence. So just end with a strong, confident note, and then just sign off with a professional closing, as you can see in the bottom. All right, so you guys can take a picture of these slides. I don't know if you guys are gonna we can send out the slide deck, I guess, and you guys can have these links. But I
also have this slide in the Google Classroom, so all the links will be given to you guys.
Awesome. So I attached my cover letter for example of what you can write in a cover letter, and then we have Aarushi's final resume, which will also help you. And then we have attached a list of power verbs, so those like your big, nice, fancy words that you could use in your bullet statements, and then just a few different templates to write your resumes.
Cool. So now let's go into the interview part of getting, or like interviewing for a job or an internship. This comes after you've caught the hiring manager's attention with your resume. Next slide. So generally, the interviews for high school students and for younger college students are behavioral interviews. They're not going to ask you any technical questions unless you're applying for some computer science field. So we're covering behavioral interviews today. These generally, they'll ask you questions like, tell me something, 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 or like, give me an example of something, something, something. So that's how the question is always going to start. And these questions will always ask you to share concrete examples of situations that you've been in that can demonstrate some skills to the employer. And then the goal of these questions is that you want to provide the key examples that show that you've done something in the past that can apply to what you're going to be doing in the future if they choose to hire you. Next slide. So the first question in a behavioral interview is always going to be, tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume. And this is a really important question because it can set the tone for the entire interview. If it doesn't go well, then they kind of have a block in their mind and a negative first impression of you. But if it goes really well, then the whole interview will be much smoother from there on out. And this question is always trying to get at if you're going to be a good fit for the company in terms of your background, but also in terms of your personality. So over on the left side, you can see a list of do's and don'ts. So what you want to always make sure to do is start with your elevator pitch. This is something that you're going to hear pretty often and something that I'll talk more about on the other side of the slide. And this elevator pitch should always address your selling point. So like Brooke was talking about in the resume and cover letter part, you're always trying to pitch yourself to the employer, but then there's a degree of selling to it because you're not bragging, but you are in a way kind of, I don't want to say embellishing, but you are painting yourself in a more positive light that I think a lot of us see ourselves in. And then you also want to make sure to cover why you're interested in the role so that they have a clear picture of why you're applying to their company and not like the next company on the other street over. And something that you don't want to do is to go through every single bullet point on your resume. I see this really often. People, they kind of freak out at this question and then they go line by line down the resume. That's not something that you want to do. The person that you're interviewing with is going to cut you off at some point. You also don't want to ramble without a view of where you're going with your response. You want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then tie it all up in a nice bow for them. And yeah, you don't want to be humble or modest, basically the opposite of selling yourself. So in terms of your elevator pitch, on the right side, you can see like the three main components. So the first part is you should definitely cover who you are, like academically and professionally. So if you're like a high school student, you could say something like, this is my name, this is what I'm studying, I'm like a junior or senior, and this is why I'm like interested in this field, or like this is where I want to go in the future. And then you would highlight some specific experiences. So you wouldn't pick, like I said, every single point on your resume, but maybe like the past two experiences, the most recent ones that you've done are the ones that you think apply most to the job that you're applying for. So say you were like a tutor and then you were a coach, and then you think that those skills will apply to the job that you're applying for. Make sure you talk about those experiences, but then again, you want to be concise and talk about exactly what you did and the impact of what you did. And you want to be enthusiastic throughout. You don't want to make the person like bored or like make them want to fall asleep. And then you want to end by saying why you're applying for their company. So the why is always something about how your past experience aligns with their values, or like where the company is moving in the future, or like your future goals. So those three steps is like how you should answer this question, and that's basically your elevator pitch. Next slide. So some common questions you will get in the behavioral form of the interview after you have like the intro and tell me about yourself. They'll generally ask you a lot of questions that can be categorized into 6 main buckets. So here are the first 3. So one of the common buckets is teamwork. And with teamwork questions, they're always trying to get at like a situation where you worked with others and you face some sort of challenge. So an example of a question that's trying to get at your teamwork abilities is like, tell me about a time you worked on your team, or like, tell me about a time you struggled working on a team, or like you faced conflict working on a team. So all of these are fair game. And for this question, you always want a story that really illustrates your ability to work with others under challenging circumstances, because they want to know how will you cooperate with the team and how you demonstrate initiative in a team. So these are really important. So your stories for this should involve some form of team conflict, or like some form of difficult project constraints, or like some form of clashing personalities, and then how you overcame that difficulty. And then another common bucket is leadership. So for leadership questions, they're always trying to get at an experience where like you took charge of a group, and then they want to know exactly what you did in that role. So some example of a question could be like, tell me about a time you took on a leadership role, or like describe your leadership style, or tell me about a time where you had ideas and you had to turn that into action. That's all examples of leadership questions. And these are like super popular in basically every position because it's always client facing. So you in this answer to this form of question, you want to talk about a time where you specifically led a team and where you delivered really exceptional results. So your story should always involve a time when you were in a group situation. I think that's pretty obvious here. It should also include a time where you took initiative, and then you should walk the interviewer through your decision making process. So like exactly what you did and then the outcome. And then a third bucket is time management. So with time management questions, this is really important, especially as you're all students, because they want to make sure that you can balance the job that you're going to be or that you're being considered for with your schoolwork. So some examples of the questions for these could be like, tell me about a time where you were juggling a lot of responsibilities and like how did you handle it? Or tell me about a long-term project that you managed and how did you keep everything according to schedule? Or like, tell me about a time where you set some goals and how you went about achieving your objectives. Those are all time management related. So, like I said, you need to talk about a time where you were juggling a lot of different responsibilities. You could bring up a time where you were in like a lot of different clubs or taking very hard classes, but were able to do everything exceptionally well. And this story to answer the question should always talk about some like goals that you set and then the steps that you went to accomplish those goals. And if possible, sometime, like I said, when you're really busy and you had to prioritize. Okay, next slide. So these are the other three buckets that I was referring to. So the fourth one you can say is communication. So there's always going to be interview questions that ask you for your communication skills because basically any job will always ask you to perform like some form of spoken or written communication, and they want to make sure that you can do it effectively. So for this bucket, some examples of questions that they might ask are like, describe a successful presentation you gave and then why it was such a success. Or like, tell me about a time where you had to present like complex information and how did you break it down and convey it very clearly. So I think for this one, there shouldn't be any difficulty in thinking of a story for communication questions because I feel like you encounter in every sort of club or activity that you're in, but then it's also just a part of your everyday life, like how you can communicate. The important thing here is to not get lost in the story, but to refocus it on your thought process and your preparations. So I think it goes unsaid that you should definitely talk about like some form of written or spoken communication. And then, like I said, your thought process of how you walk them through your communication skills and then the outcome. So like if you gave a really successful presentation, what was the outcome of that presentation? Or like, why was it such a success? And then the fifth bucket that we can talk about is your ability to adapt. And this is super, super important for a lot of roles because you're going to be in a lot of challenging circumstances. And then employers want to know how you're able to handle that pressure and if you're able to be flexible. So some examples of some questions is like, talk about a time where you worked under pressure, or like tell me about a time where you failed, or tell me about a time where you had to think on your feet. These are all testing your adaptiveness. So for this, the key is to always include some form of crisis or like some situation that you successfully navigated. It could be with other people, it could be without other people. And then also include the steps that you took and some form of a lesson or a silver lining so that the employer knows that you're a mature, reflective person who's able to reflect back on the situation and then know how you can improve in the future. And that part is really crucial for ability to adapt questions. And then the last bucket is kind of like a catch-all. It's your motivations and values. So this bucket basically includes like all the kind of questions you see that don't really fit into a major bucket, but they're all testing like who you are as a person and then how you're able to stay true to yourself. So some questions they might have are like, tell me about your proudest accomplishment, or tell me about a time where you had to make a really difficult decision. And so these you might think are like difficult questions, but the key here is that you really need to focus on like what drives you as a person. So like if you're telling them about a time where you had to make a difficult decision, maybe in that you're trying to demonstrate how ethical of a person you are, or like Yeah, something along those lines, basically. I remember for one of my questions when someone asked me, like, tell me about a time you had to make a difficult decision, I talked about a time where I found out that a friend was being dishonest on a test and how that like referred back to my values of how I was a really ethical and moral person, and that even though she was my friend, I stayed true to myself and yeah, went towards resolving the situation in a proper way. So I think for these questions, you, like I said, you always want to talk about why you picked that example, and then include like what your values are and then how you demonstrated those values. So that's it for this bucket. Can we go to the next slide, please? So for these questions, the way that you want to answer it, so in the previous two slides, I talked about what are some things you want to include in your answer to those questions, but this is how you should structure your answer. So it's called the STAR format. It's something that you'll see really often. It's the situation, task, action, and result. So when you first bring up your answer to the question, you want to set the situation. So you want to set the scene, give like the details so the person can really pretend like they were in that situation, and so that the person can see the context of like what you're going to talk about. And then the task is like basically describe what your responsibility was. So this should answer the question of what was the problem in the situation, what was the need, what was the concern that you had to address, and then the action addresses like how you answer that task, basically like what steps you took to address the task. And what's really key here is that it should have I statements and not we statements, because again, this is an interview for you. This is not an interview for your group members or like your friend or your family. It's about what you did in the situation. So make sure you focus on like what steps you specifically took to address it. And then the result obviously explains what was the outcome of the actions that you took that was addressing the task that you were given. So your result here you should always try to quantify it. And by this I mean like maybe talk about like what was the time frame in which you accomplished it, or like the scale, so like how much money did you save, or how much time did you save, or like what was the outcome of the efficiency, so the person can see why your answer was relevant to the situation at hand. Okay, next slide. So here are some tips to keep in mind, like while you're preparing and while you're answering. I think just keeping this in mind has really helped me when I'm thinking about interviewing. So while you're preparing, you want to make sure that you research the organization or the company that you're applying for. I feel like this is kind of a given, but you'd be surprised how many people overlook it and just go in like based on the knowledge that they have. I think like the more you know about the job, just reading the job description or like talking to people who have had that position in the past or something similar, and then also just going online and reading any news you can find out about that company or like what's happening at the current period of time. I think you can show that knowledge off in your interviews, or like incorporate that, or be something like, I know that this job requires XXX skills, and then this is how I can demonstrate them. So it shows that you're knowledgeable about what you're talking about. And then the second part is to make a list of examples. So in the questions that in the buckets that I was talking about, I outlined like 6 different buckets. So what I would do is I would sit down and think about like maybe like 5 different stories that you've had in your life, or like difficult situations that you've had, and then outline like 5 to 7 steps that you took, and then alternatives you considered, and then the results. So basically write the entire STAR format for each example that you can think of, and then you can adapt that example to any question that's thrown at you. So you can have an example that you could use for a communication question, but you could also use it for a leadership question. You could also use it for a flexibility or adaptiveness question. So I think instead of worrying about like how to answer every specific question, focus on preparing very in-depth examples, and that's more effective in the long run. And then the last part is to be ready to share a story. So like I said, you don't want to focus on like the nitty-gritty details of the question, but like at large, what is the question getting at? And then you want to make sure that you keep the interviewer engaged throughout. So you want to tell it like a story and wrap it up in a nice bow, like a nice package for them at the very end. And then while answering, you want to make sure like you set the scene. So a lot of people just jump straight into their action and the result, but the S and the T, which is the situation and the task, is very important so the interviewer can get the context of the whole situation. And then also emphasize your contribution. Like I said earlier, you want to emphasize on that what you did or not what your group did. So specifics on the steps that you took and the results that you obtained. And then you want to end on a high note. So the result should either be positive, or if it's a negative result, you want to talk about what you learned so that you're ending on a sort of high note of like, oh, I did this amazing thing, or like, this is what I took away from this situation, and this is how I'm going to improve in the future. So these are just my tips for the interview. Next slide. Yeah, so in terms of resources for like finding a job or an internship, this set of slides basically can help you like yeah, like websites to look at and programs to look at. So next slide.
I'm so sorry, I still skipped a slide. Do you want to go over it really quick?
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so here are some virtual interview tips. So I included this slide because a lot of times interviews now for programs, whether it's like summer programs or even jobs, are online. So I think this is really relevant given today's situation. So here are 6 tips. So the first one is to dress to impress. I think don't just like wake up and then sit in front of the camera and then interview. Like don't get too casual just because like you're not there in person. I would say be just as formal as you would for an in-person interview, and then it just helps to put you in the mindset, but then also the other person can see that you're kind of serious. And then the second thing is to make sure your background is like pretty quiet and lighted, and then there's no distractions that are like going to come in and bother you. And then the third one is to test the technology. So oftentimes the interviewer will tell you ahead of like they'll send you some sort of calendar invite that has a Zoom link, or or it'll be like Skype or Microsoft Teams. I've seen Google Hangouts too. So make sure that you're familiar with the technology and you know the basics. So if they ask you to share your screen or like use the whiteboard and explain your thinking, you know exactly how to do that. And you're not asking them like, oh, I don't know how to do this, or you're wasting time during the interview. And then for the practice part, you want to practice speaking on camera. For me, I'm kind of a paranoid person. So sometimes if it's a really big interview, I'll record my responses and then watch them and see like if there's things that I'm doing or like I don't like how I'm answering a specific question, then I'll do it again. So I feel comfortable in front of the camera when I'm actually in the interview. And then the next one is to maintain eye contact. So if you're in person, this is really easy to look them in the eye and project your confidence. But over like Zoom, it's kind of hard. So you want to make sure that you look straight at the camera rather than down. I think if you look down, they might be worried that like there's something like on there in front of you that you're reading off of, or that you're not confident in your answer. So you really want to just project confidence, and that's why like eye contact is so important. And then the last one is engagement. I think online it's so easy to just like scroll through your phone or just like be distracted by notifications. But you want to make sure that you're sitting up straight and you're showing facial expressions. So you're like nodding or like saying yes, even if you're muted, to show that you're engaged while the interviewer is like talking or asking you questions. Okay, yeah, now we can go on to the resources part. Next slide. So this is kind of an overview of how like the whole job or internship process will go. So the first part is like the outreach, is when you're applying online or like you're asking your friends and family if they have connections, just like the whole finding the opportunity part. And then the next part is the interview part, which is what I just covered, where like you want to make sure you prepare accordingly, doing all your research, practicing your responses, but also make sure to relax before your interview. Like don't go into it stressed. I think the interviewer can definitely sense tension. And then if all goes well, you'll accept the offer. And I wanted to include this step because it's not something that a lot of people think about, but it's really important. So oftentimes they'll give you a contract. If they don't give you a contract, I would specifically ask them for a contract so that you know what to expect, and then you know like if like you're going above and beyond like what's required of you, but then also if they're overworking you, because I think this is something that can happen a lot, especially if it's an unstructured internship or like it's something that you just reach out to them for an experience. And then sometimes they'll also give you an NDA, and I'd make sure to read this pretty carefully, because sometimes if I've heard of situations where sometimes like a lawsuit did happen and then the person didn't sign an NDA, or like they didn't read it carefully, and then like things happen there that could have easily been remedied if they just read it properly. So I would make sure to read whatever documents you're given, and then if you're not given any documents, make sure to request some documents, because a verbal commitment is not good enough. And then I'd also be careful, because you all are students, make sure that you tell them exactly how many hours per week you can work, so it's within your range and you're not overworking yourself and then letting some other part of your life, like your grades, slip. Okay, next slide. So here are some websites to check out. These are the most popular ones that I've seen. So AngelList is a website I know where you can make like a profile and you can find jobs and internships with startups. Um, I've seen a lot of people use this just to get those first couple experiences on their resume, and then like after that they move off of the site and then they look for more structured internships. But if you're just searching for something more, like you could make like a 3, 4 month, 6 month commitment, I think this is a great option. The second option is called Built by Girls, so it's only for girls. And you make an account on their website and you get paired up with a mentor, I believe like every 3 months. So I did this in high school. It was a really great experience. I got matched with a mentor at like Amazon, EA, so that's like the gaming company, and then Microsoft. And so you get mentorship from them and you can complete a project with them. And they also give you access to their Slack workspace that has a ton of jobs opportunities, club opportunities, and like leadership opportunities. So I would like highly, highly recommend this if you're a girl. The third one is a newsletter that is in beta stage. So there's a lot of buzz around it right now because they have a lot of funding as a startup, but it's a newsletter for high schoolers that will include like internships, competitions, and scholarships. So I would sign up for their newsletter because when it starts coming out, I'm sure it's going to have a lot of really great stuff on it. And then the fourth one is it's a website or like a portal that's created by a lot of girls from Canada. So they're actually based in Toronto or Vancouver, I forget. This is also for girls only, but basically you can find short term, they call them apprenticeships, so basically internships, but like for very short periods of time. So think like 2 months max. So it's pretty low commitment, but it's a great addition to your resume, especially in high school. And the cool part is that you get paired with female founders in many industries, so you get a lot of mentorship from them too. I've had like a lot of friends in high school who did this option, and it was a really cool experience. They did a lot of apprenticeships, so maybe they did one in like computer science and then another one in like product management or product design, and then they did another one in like business or marketing. So I think you can explore a lot of different fields. And then, of course, beyond this, there's a ton of other resources out there. I know my school district had like a website with a lot of different opportunities. So if your school district has one, I would also recommend looking into that. And then my school counselor was pretty helpful for some people. So if you can meet with your counselor online, I would let them know like, oh, I'm looking for some opportunities. Like, please let me know if you hear anything. And then, of course, ask your parents, and then ask your friends' parents if they know anyone. Yeah, next slide. So for wait, I think was there okay, never mind. So for field specific opportunities, I included this here because I think these are like the three most popular fields that a lot of people or like people tend to ask about is like, how can I find opportunities in like tech, business, or medicine? That's not to say if you're not interested in any of these fields, there's no opportunities out there for you because there's a ton of opportunities out there, but these are the three most common ones. So I basically under each one, I just listed a lot of programs that I've heard of. So for tech, obviously there's Girls Who Code. There's the Google Computer Science Summer Institute. This is kind of an underrated program, but you can apply to it I believe once you graduate high school. So in like the year between your senior year and then your first year of college. And it's like you get Google on your resume like very early on. And I think that's a really great building experience. And then Facebook has a summer academy as well. Microsoft runs a high school internship, and so does Boeing. So these are just some companies that have high school internships, and they're great because it's a really big name on your resume earlier on. And then once you get to college, you'll have a big name, and it's so much easier to get like really cool opportunities early on in your college like career. And then for business, so I did the Bank of America Student Leader Program. It was a great experience. Basically, I think you apply sometime actually right now, like in January or February, and they match you with a nonprofit or like some sort of social enterprise, and you work with them for like 8 weeks. And then you also get flown out to Washington, D.C. for a conference, and you get to meet Congress people. So it's a really cool experience. and I believe you can apply as a junior or senior. And then another program is called Economics for Leaders, or E4L for short. I've heard really great things about this. It's like a 2 or 3 week program in the summer, and it's fully subsidized. It's a really cool experience. They take you to like different site visits, or like the Federal Reserve and things like that. So it's a really cool career building experience. And then NASA has a lot of, they have like business departments, so those have high school internships. And then the last two are summer programs that are very cool, and I've heard a lot of great things about. So the first one is UPenn Wharton School Leadership in the Business World program. This is an amazing program, especially if you're interested in applying to the Wharton School of Business. It's basically a feeder program. So if you get into this one, like the opportunities that they give you are so awesome that, and like if you do well, they evaluate you throughout the program too. So you can get yourself like almost an early admission to the Wharton School of Business. And then the last one is the Kelly Young Women's Institute. So this is only for girls. This is a super cool opportunity. I believe it's a case competition where they give you like a business problem and then you solve it and you get to present it to different company executives. So another really cool experience. And then for medicine, I'm not too familiar with this field, but some programs I've heard a lot of great things about are Kaiser Permanente's launch program. So this is like their high school internship. I think it's research, but then it's also like hands-on clinical experience. And then Stanford has a super competitive program called SIMMER, which is the Institutes of Medicine Research Program. So I think research is a really great addition to your resume. You can write like research assistant, and it shows a lot of great skills. Like time management is one of the biggest things that research can show. But then also, if you can work a lot in a research lab, you can get yourself one of the first or like the first 3 author positions on a paper, or like a co-author, and that's a really big thing, especially as a high school student. And then the last 3 are programs run by the different UCs. Like UCSF has a high school internship program. Cosmos is another super popular one. And then UC Santa Cruz has the SIP, which is also their internship program. So a lot of opportunities out there. I'd say medicine is more like college based, and then the other 2 are like opportunities you can get at startups or like big companies out there. Next slide. Yeah, so these are more like links to check out. You can like take a screenshot of the slide, but I wrote like some description. So there's like a list of high school opportunities, computer science resources specifically for high school girls, and then Southern California specific opportunities, and then some national summer programs. But yeah, that's it. So you can go to the last slide. Okay, yeah, thank you. That's the end. If you guys have any questions, we can answer them now.
Okay, there's a lot at the very top, so I could read them out to you if you want, but
Cool.
thank you so much. That was such a detailed presentation. I think all the slides were so like put together well. I think the first question was, what can you say or do when you need more time to think during an interview?
I would say just ask like, is it okay if I take a couple minutes to think about my answer? Just be very straight out, and they'll give you like a minute or 2 to think about your answer, and then you can respond. I would also say that if you need like more than that to think, you could say, can we move on to another question and come back to this question? That's like something that's pretty, a lot of people don't do that, but I think that's a really great option. Another thing is just speak very slowly, and then that gives you more time to think about what you're going to say. And then that can also help you reduce the amount of filler words that you use. A lot of people say that like is a really common word for a lot of high school students to use, and then like and then filler words basically. So it can knock out 2 birds with 1 stone when you talk slowly and you pause while you talk. So yeah, I'd say those are my biggest tips. If Brooke has like any other tips.
Something that's a little more discreet if you're uncomfortable with straight up asking, you could also say, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? And it'll just give you a few seconds to like, even though you actually heard the question, it gives you a few seconds just to pull yourself together, take a deep breath, and just quickly string together a sentence. So other than that, what Aarushi said definitely works really well too. Like if you really need that time, don't be afraid to just ask for it. Your interviewer usually is really understanding that, like they understand that there's nerves, and also to put together, I'm so sorry, to put together like a coherent response, you sometimes need a little bit of time. So don't be scared to ask if you need it.
Okay, well, those are really helpful tips. But someone else also asked, like, what are good tips for people who are like nervous speakers and especially like when they get nervous during interviews, like they could be perfectly fine speaking to other people, but like specifically in interviews, what are good tips for them?
I would say like for me, I get nervous a lot, and I'd say practice helps the most. So I said like I think in the presentation I said I always record myself, so I feel like that helps me. So I would like I put like a prompt at like the top of my screen like on a post-it that has the question, and then I pretend answering it to the camera, and then I watch myself and then like answer the question. So then that practice has helped me when I actually have to answer the question in the interview. And then I would say like if you feel weird like recording yourself, you can always ask to do a mock interview with a friend. I think that's super helpful because they can tell you straight out like if you're like fidgeting or like if you're saying a lot of likes or ums or your answer was just plain out bad. I think a friend is always a great option if you don't feel comfortable like asking your parents.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is more geared towards Brooke because she did cover the cover letter part, but what are some things that we should definitely include or not include in a cover letter?
Yeah, okay, so that's a great question. So for your cover letter, some things that you want to do is you want to make sure you keep it to one page because again, if you're flipping through a lot of cover letters and resumes, you don't want to read like a 600-word essay. So I like to keep it no longer than one page, maybe 3/4 of the page, and including like the heading should be enough. And make sure you use like a really positive tone, show that you're so excited to apply for this job and there's just like and you should just be really excited. You're like, look at all the stuff that I did in the past. Like, I'm sure it's gonna help you so great, and I'm so excited to be able to use this in this new job. So show your excitement, and don't be afraid to use conviction and a little bit of humor because your resume, so your cover letter is also supposed to be very professional, but your resume doesn't give you a lot of chance to show your personality. Yeah, you might have that little skills and traits section at the bottom, but you don't really get to show who you are as a person. And personally, I think I have a pretty big personality, and that's why I love writing cover letters because it just gives me an opportunity to show that to the employer. And just some things to avoid, again, just irrelevant experience or something super personal. You don't really need to show that. A super important thing, stay positive in the whole thing. Don't put negative experiences on it. So don't talk about how you quit your previous job because you hated your manager. Don't talk about how your coworkers bullied you in the past. That does not help your case at all. You're like, oh, I'm trying to gain pity points. That doesn't work. Fortunately, pity points don't really work. So again, keep it positive. And one last important thing is just make sure that you don't sell yourself as using this position as like a stepping stone. So don't be like, oh, I want this job because it will help me get another job in the future. Or don't be like, I want this job because it looks good on a college resume. Like, as an employer, you would want someone that wants to be there because they truly wants to be there and they're not just using you, even though you may actually be using that job to like get you closer to your future goal. Don't write it as that way. Frame it as you want that job because you want to learn from it and you want to have that experience under your belt. Aarushi, do you have anything to
Add on to that, I would say I'd say for some positions there's no harm in saying that like you're interested in pursuing I'm just gonna make this up, but say you're interested in pursuing like finance full time as like a career when you graduate college. I think there's no harm in saying that, but what Brooke said is really important. You don't want to go to like an accounting firm and say that, oh, I want like this position as like an accounting intern, so then I can go to a bigger company and then get like another accounting position, and then like go to another company and then get like a corporate finance internship, and then become like and then go into finance full time. I don't think you need to say that. Like it's okay to just say like they understand that you're not going to be working at that company. Obviously, if it's an internship, you're not going to be working at there like for your whole life. But you can definitely just say that I'm interested in this job because I hope to pursue like something else full time. That's just leave it at that. Don't like yeah, what Brooke said. Don't like walk them through. Give them extra details when it's not necessary.
Okay, thank you. So going back to interviews, now that we've covered everything about cover letters, someone was asking what kind of body language and tone would help you through an interview. So yeah, basically that.
I think like in terms of body language, I always try to use like hand gestures to show that I'm really engaged. And then when they're asking a question or like there's like a pause, just always smile, because I think if you're just sitting here and then you're just like staring at them straight, they can't figure out whether you're interested or not. And then as someone who's been on the other side, like who has interviewed people before, it's super off-putting when someone is just standing, like you know that maybe outside the interview they're a really great person, but in the interview they're sitting there and then they're treating it like they're getting their teeth pulled. That's not very fun. So always just like smile, maybe like at the very beginning when you're introducing yourself, or there's always a thing where they ask like, how's your day going? Instead of saying like fine or good, say something that's actually true about how your day went. So for me, when I was interviewing for Girls Who Invest this fall, the interviewer asked me, how's your day going? And then I talked about how in my apartment the water went out, so I had to drink almond milk for the whole day. So something like that, they can understand that you're a person, and they understand that like you're in the interview you're obviously being serious, but the outside of the interview you're a person that they would actually want to work with.
Yeah, definitely. At the very end of an interview, normally the interviewer would say, do you have any other questions? What are some questions that we should be asking?
Okay, this is a really good question. I would make sure to ask like, what are examples, if they didn't cover this already, what are examples of past projects that interns have done? So I think this is important to see like whether they're just like put out this posting and then they're gonna make you do like administrative tasks, or they actually have a plan of what they want to make you do. And then also see how much direction you can have with it. So if they say you're going to be doing mostly writing, but you want to be doing content creation, seeing if there's like flexibility there to direct the view of the internship. I would also ask, okay, I'm thinking about what else. I would say a lot of it is directed by like your research. So something that I feel like I always ask is, where do you see this company going like in the future, or like how do you see my work that I would do as an intern contributing to the future of the company? I feel like this is a better question for a startup or like a smaller company, rather than if you're interviewing with like NASA or something. That's like, I don't know how you would know that if you're like where your work actually fits. um Something else that I would ask is like, I wouldn't ask this directly, but like, what does success look like in the position? So maybe something like you're trying to get at, like how they'll evaluate you on like a 1 week basis, and then like a 1 month basis, and then a 3 month basis. So figuring out like how you know that you're going to be doing well if you get chosen for the position. I think that's also really important. I feel like those three are my go-to questions. And then other ones come up as specific for the interview. And yeah, I'd encourage you like not to make a general list, but when you're doing your research, actively think of questions that you could ask them.
I had a few other questions that I also like to use that you can totally add on to what Aarushi said, because I really liked Arushi's questions. I'll probably be using some in the near future. But you also the questions gave you like a really good chance to let you get a feel for more of like a personal feel about the company. So some things I like to ask is like, what is your favorite part about working in this company, or like how would you describe the overall like culture of the company? And that one lets you know like, is this the right fit for me actually? And also lets the employer know that you're interested in beyond just like the surface level, just like bullets on papers about the company. You're interested about like the company as a whole and the people inside the company. And then there's this one other question. I read it on a forum once, and it's a great question. It takes a little bit of guts to ask it, but ask your employer what hesitations they have in hiring you. So you want to phrase it in a way where it doesn't sound cocky when you're like, yeah, like I'm so good, like I don't understand why you wouldn't hire me. But ask it in a way that sounds like you're asking for feedback. So if your employer says, so if the person answers and they're like, oh, I'm not really sure because I don't think you have enough experience in that work field, that gives you another chance to answer that question right there and be like, well, actually, I might not have experience in this, but I actually have done this before and I wasn't able to bring it up, but I think it'll be a great experience, like a great way that I could work it into this company and it will be a great like for you and it'll be great for me. So it just gives you first of all, it just shows the employer that you have confidence, but like good confidence, not arrogance. And it also just gives you a second chance to tie up any like loose ends or fill in any holes in your story that you weren't able to answer before.
Yeah, what Brooke said, those are like great questions. I've actually seen someone ask what hesitation do you have about me? I think they phrased it as like, what could I do to make myself more competitive for like future positions in this, something along those lines, but wasn't asking like directly what their hesitations were, but they also got the answer that they wanted. Something that I would ask at the very end is like, what are next steps? So, um, I think this is more important for like bigger companies as you interview for like bigger companies because it kind of puts a pressure on them like, oh, I can't just leave this person hanging like a week from now if I didn't like them. I actually have to get back to them. So, because I told them I would get back to them. So, yeah, I think just like figuring out when you can expect a response, and it's also important if you have like you're interviewing for a lot of companies and then you might get some offers and you have to figure out like, okay, well, is it worth waiting for this company when like they didn't really have next steps? So yeah.
Okay, well, during an interview, let's say you do happen to like butcher your answers because you're mostly using filler words, or like you say like the wrong thing. How would you be able to like recover from that, or like what's a good way to help your interviewer look past your messed up answer?
That's like a tough question because I would hope that like you practiced before and then you wouldn't mess up in the interview. I'd say if you know that you completely butchered a question, I'm like a believer in the fact that if you just come out clean and you just be something like, let me scratch that or like let me answer that question again and then give a better response a second time around. I think you'll get plus points for being honest and like being straightforward. And then B, it gives you a chance to just redo it right then and there. It's not something where you're like, oh, can I come back to that or can I get a chance to answer that and something like that.
Okay, and then one final question is, would you say it helps your interview when you praise the company, or will the interview seem like it's like kissing up to them?
Uh, that's an interesting question because uh, I I in interviews I definitely say, or when sometimes they're asking me questions, I say, oh, like I read this amazing thing on your website or something like that. I think it's okay to drop those words in there, but yeah, I would caution going over the top. Like, I would insert it in like tastefully when it makes sense in the question that you're answering, but I wouldn't just drop it in out of the blue being like, your company's so awesome. I would love to work with you. It'd be a dream come true because you already talked like that in your cover letter. They obviously know that already. But yeah.
Okay, well, I think that is the end of the questions. Thank you so much for doing this webinar.